Hello and welcome to a full hour of news from around the world. I'm Amarachi Ubani here in Lagos. Here are our headlines this hour. European Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell says Russia's blockade of millions of tons of grain from Ukraine is a real war crime. French President Emmanuel Macron faces two powerful opposition groups after losing a majority of the seats in the National Assembly. Plus, the UK prepares for what will be considered its biggest rail strike in 30 years. Hello again. The European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell says one cannot imagine that millions of tons of wheat remain blocked in Ukraine while the rest of the world is suffering hunger, referring to Russia's blockade of millions of tons of Ukrainian grain, an action he's described as a real war crime. He said this as foreign ministers meet to discuss that crisis. Mr. Borrell calls on Russia to deblockade the Ukrainian ports. He is only being re-echoing a demand by Western nations that Russia stop blockading Ukraine's Black Sea ports and allow vast stores of grain to reach world markets. The blockade has sparked warnings that tens of millions of people are at risk of famine and food prices are soaring. He says that Russia should be accountable if it keeps blocking the export of vitally needed grain from Ukraine. In the meantime, Ukrainian farmers are said to be facing a crisis as new grain harvests are adding to already existing stockpiles blocked from export as a result of the war in Ukraine. Vast fields of wheat outside of Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, are almost ready for harvest, and market watchers say they should be helping to feed the world. Instead, the fields are presenting farmers with major headaches. Some of Ukraine's largest agricultural enterprises, such as Harv East, are complaining. With 3/4 of Harv East agricultural land now under Russian control and export of its previous harvest still disrupted, the business is struggling.
We still have a huge store, a huge amount of grain which is still not exported, and in a month we'll have new harvest of winter wheat and rapes, and it is a huge problem at the moment.
We could reach the maximum of up to 2 million tons per month by these routes. It's only not more than half of the possibility of the sea. So we could cover 40–50% only of what we need.
The biggest problem is that agriculture producer who is not able to sell grain now doesn't have money to buy, because all credit programs from international suppliers are stopped right now, and we don't have enough to seed. So next year I expect it will be much worse than this year.
Russia's been answering back European nations, saying they have no one else to blame but themselves for the crisis in the gas market as well, demanding that gas turbines used by the Nord Stream 1 pipeline be returned. Russia's state-controlled gas firm Gazprom cut capacity along Nord Stream 1 last week, citing the delayed return of equipment currently being serviced by Germany's Siemens Energy in Canada. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters that Russia has gas to supply, but the equipment should be sent back first, adding that the recent crisis was of a man-made nature created by Europe. Russian gas flows to Germany through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, the main route supplying Europe's biggest economy, where still running at about 40% capacity as of today, even though it edged up from the start of last week. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the UK's Foreign Secretary Liz Truss have both addressed leaders at a 3 Seas Initiative summit in Latvia. Speaking via video link, Mr. Blinken said the war in Ukraine had underscored the importance of strong transportation infrastructure, while Ms. Truss told the summit that Russian President Vladimir Putin is weaponizing hunger and Russian energy. The 3 Seas Initiative brings together 12 European Union member states located between the Adriatic, Baltic and Black Seas and aims to boost economic ties and enhance energy, transport and digital links among countries.
That ranges from Russia.
Greater energy independence will make member states less vulnerable to the Kremlin's coercion. It will deprive the Russian government of massive resources that's used to help bankroll its attack on the independence of Ukraine, not to mention several other countries in recent. President Putin's war of choice has highlighted the critical importance of strong transportation infrastructure. The region's roads, rails, and airfields have been used by NATO to move personnel and equipment in order to reinforce the alliance's eastern flank. They've been used to get life-saving humanitarian and security assistance into Ukraine and to get nearly 6 million civilians out of Ukraine, most of whom have found refuge and remarkable generosity in your countries.
In his appalling hybrid war, he's trying to hold us all to ransom by weaponizing hunger and Russian energy. He's gambling that the free world will tire in the face of his aggression. We are not tired, and we can never tire in defense of freedom and democracy. And we will show that by doing everything possible to ensure that Ukraine prevails. For too long, countries have used their heft to coerce and exert control. That ranges from Russia with oil and gas to China with technology and strings-attached debt. It's imperative we strengthen our economic security by deepening our trade, sharing our expertise in science, and stepping up to provide honest and reliable investment.
Well, back on the ground, Russia is claiming its long-distance sea-based missiles destroyed a command post of Ukrainian troops, killing more than 50 generals and officers, while Ukraine insists the situation in Severodonetsk is difficult, but it's manageable. According to Russia's Defense Ministry spokesperson Igor Konashinov, Russian forces continue launching attacks at military facilities located in Ukraine. He says caliber high-precision long-distance sea-based missiles were launched at a command post of the Ukrainian troops near the village of Shirokaya Dacha in one of the regions. He says the attacks have resulted in eliminating more than 50 generals and officers of the Ukrainian armed forces, including those of the general staff and airborne assault troops and units that operate towards Nikolaev and Zaporizhzhia. Russian news agency RIA Novosti quoted the Luhansk armed forces as saying that Ukrainian troops trapped in the Azot chemical plant in Severodonetsk are still resisting, but they also expressed the willingness to negotiate. From the Ukrainian side, however, according to reports by the Ukraine National News Agency on Sunday, an advisor of Ukrainian Internal Minister Denis Monastisky said the situation on the eastern front of Ukraine is difficult, especially in the direction of Severodonetsk, but the situation is still under control. Let's talk to the VOA's Anna Chernikova, who joins us from Kyiv. Anna, great to see you. What are we understanding about the pattern of Russian attacks in Ukraine? There seems to be a concentration of bombardments on smaller towns and cities before extending, to the entire regions. You think this is a strategy of the Russian president, or are the troops just carrying out the attacks based on the importance of those towns and cities to Ukraine?
Hello. Well, I should say that this is not basically other way for Russian forces to, advance, because this is quite a difficult region, and the defense of Ukrainian forces is very high and very high quality. Despite any, troubles with the amount of artillery and so on and so forth, but still we can see and clearly see that defense is strong, and we know that the front line is basically, it's kind of, is shaping in the borders. So we can clearly see where the border so far for the moment is lying. The border at the front line. So it's just, difficult for the Russian forces to advance without first taking, villages and little towns, because it's just no other way. So I think this is a strategy. If answering to this question, yes, probably this is a strategy. But again, we have to understand that this strategy is just, it's not only because of the, certain military decisions, but also because of all these, logistic points that Russia has to consider, and very big time because of the high level of defense by Ukrainian forces. And this is basically what we see along the front line, not only in Donbas region, but also in the south. And we used to see, and well, kind of continue to see in the north part when some attacks continue. So, but of course, mostly at the Donbas.
Yeah. And the rest of the world right now is very concerned about those grains that have been prepared for exports not being able to leave Ukraine. The last time we spoke about this, you said Ukraine had enough to feed its populations. The problem was getting ready grains that were supposed to be out of the country, sold to other parts, sent to other parts of the world. But because of the Russian blockade, the Russian forces have taken over the ports, and this is quite impossible. But what is Ukraine helping to do to remedy the situation as, we await probably international intervention? You heard some of the European leaders imploring on the Russian president to remove the blockade so that grain exports can leave Ukraine and the rest of the world can prevent hunger.
Yeah, we should look at this situation from two sides. So first side is the grains which are blockaded the Black Sea, and here we should understand that Ukraine is ready to export anytime, but Ukraine needs guarantees that Russia would not use this export corridor to attack, because this is quite a huge danger of that. And we know, well, for Ukraine, Ukraine do not trust Russia. So Ukraine do not trust when Russia say that, we're not going to attack, we're not going to do anything, just provide this corridor. So Ukraine is asking for defense from the third countries in particular as well, and for the guarantees, basically military guarantees, which would include accept of defense from the third party, or at least military control of the third party, but also military, certain military imports to Ukraine, supplies which Ukraine could use in case this corridor is used by Russia for another attack. Because here we're talking about Odessa region in particular, so it is, of course, it's strategic, and of course, we can expect that Russia would do everything possible to actually use it for, certain provocations, or even as as an attack strategy. So, and this is the main point on how it looks, that this is the main point of negotiation for the moment. So Ukraine is ready to export, but Ukraine needs this guarantee. And the second side of this question, we should look at those grains that are actually exporting, but they're exporting in different ways. So there are two ways, either vehicle exporting or railway. So in terms of vehicle, it has no capacity to, cover a lot of percentage of export by sea. But if we look at the railway, it's its capacity a little bit more. But again, of course, it cannot cover 100% of the sea export. However, Ukraine is doing everything possible to, at least this is what authorities are announcing and reporting on, that Ukraine is doing everything possible to, increase this railway exports. And what we know for the moment that Lithuania and Poland are involved in this export, and Ukraine is looking for Baltic countries also to join, other Baltic countries to join. So the problem here, and difficulty, not even a problem, but difficulty here is that railway in Lithuania and Ukraine are similar, but railway in Poland, for example, are different as European railway. So there is this, difficulty, and of course cost, additional cost, because the carrier should be changed, or there is other ways. So it's just that railways are not the same. But again, Ukraine is working on this, and as we know from the official announcements by the authorities, that Ukraine is looking at the implementing the railway reform. Of course, it will take time. Of course, it's a long-term perspective, but still, Ukraine wants to modernize its railway, so it is the same as European, and then it would be much more easier, to do this export by railway. But again, as we understand, of course, this year, grains have been hard. So we have already certain, amount of harvest grains for export. What's going to happen next year? Because of course, there are difficulties of, implementing all this procedure to actually harvest grains next year. So this is another question. But, it looks like this is one of the top priorities questions remains for the moment, and a lot of European countries and the US are also concerned and are trying to, resolve this problem. So really, we hope that this would be resolved as soon as possible, because of course a lot of countries and a lot of people are suffering, and this is the worst.
Anna, let's look at gas, and I know that Ukraine has gotten, or rather usually gets a large supply quantity from Russia. So how has Ukraine coped, with gas imports during this time?
Well, we know that there are certain gas storages and certain gas, Ukrainian gas, certain capacity that Ukraine has to cover its needs. Also, there are European countries that start to export gas to Ukraine. Of course, we cannot, so it's different amount, but what we hear from the officials is for the moment this should be okay, at least for the next winter. We cannot, we don't have deep analysis or deep, let's say, deep discussion of this question yet. But of course, this is quite a problematic also area. And of course, closer to winter, and actually it's, it's almost middle of summer already. So definitely Ukraine would consider this question as another priority question for the winter season. And soon I think that this question would be discussed more. But for the moment, what we see that Ukraine would use its own gas, and also certain European experts from European countries. So yeah, this is the situation for the moment, and of course it's it's difficult logistically and it's difficult in general. But we'll see. For the moment, this is what we have.
Yeah, and over the weekend, the EU Commission recommended Ukraine be given candidacy status in the EU. What would that mean for Ukrainians who are listening, to a piece of news like that?
Well, it's huge. It's really huge for Ukraine. It's incredibly positive, and for Ukrainians in general, this is first of all a sign of extreme support from European countries, from the EU, from European partners. It's encouragement. Secondly, it's definitely a huge encouragement for Ukrainians to continue to fight, because, of course, Ukrainians are protecting not only its own borders but also the borders of the free world, and this is very true. And protecting European values and European security is, it's a very, very big deal. So this, this decision is definitely, it is extremely important. And also, of course, important because this creates, this certain roadmap for Ukraine in terms of reforms, in terms of economic growth, and human rights reforms, all different kind of that. So it's extremely important also for this particular, political side, that Ukraine is basically has this, certain roadmap to follow, and we can already see that certain, laws are introduced in the parliament, and votes are voting in the parliament, and we can definitely see the connection between these laws which are voting and this decision. So Ukrainians are extremely positive about that.
Anna, thank you so much for being with us today, and do stay safe.
Thank you.
When we come back after the break. The Belgian capital, Brussels, at a standstill as over 70,000 people are protesting rising cost of living in the country. Join us again. Welcome back to The World Today. And on this World Refugee Day, providing clean environments and combating climate change is a must and a priority for one refugee from the DR Congo. Vasco Hamisi is his name. He's providing clean and sustainable energy to businesses and homes in Kenya's Kakuma refugee camp. He started a business that provides clean energy on a 20 kWp solar panel grid, a lifeline for thousands of refugees and their hosts.
Vasco Hamisi is checking on solar panels at Okapi Green Energy Limited in northwestern Kenya's Kakuma refugee camp. The Congolese refugee is the brains behind this plant, which provides clean energy to 200 businesses in and outside the camp.
I decided to go in green energy first. When I came here, we are really struggling to get light.
Hamisi arrived in Kakuma 12 years ago after fleeing fighting in his hometown in the Democratic Republic of Congo. He set up Okapi Green Energy as a private company and in 2017 received $28,000 from various donors to set up a 20 kilowatt solar mini grid. Bitisho Tosambe, a Congolese refugee, runs a shop that offers printing and photography services. She also sells mobile phone accessories. She has reliable energy supply through the Okapi mini grid. Only 1% of over 200,000 refugees in the camp and the adjacent Kalobiyi settlement have access to electricity through the main power grid. The rest have to rely on expensive and often unstable alternative sources. With donor support, UNHCR and partners have installed 13 new solarized boreholes and fitted 2 health facilities with solar systems in Kakuma and Kalobiyi. More support is also needed for refugee-owned businesses like Okapi to supply clean energy to refugee households. Hamisi says he's glad he can contribute towards clean energy solutions in the camp, where most refugee families cannot afford to light their houses at night.
I've seen that we are still having more potential people who are still coming to ask for connection. But for the power that we have, the 20 kilowatts that we have, we cannot connect everyone in Kakuma.
The company employs 10 staff members, most of whom are refugees. Hamisi plans to replicate the project in different parts of Kakuma in future.
To politics in France now, where the Conservative Party, Les Républicains, Christian Jacobs says no pact has been made yet with President Emmanuel Macron on forming a coalition government in the National Assembly. The French president on Sunday lost control of the National Assembly in legislative elections after significant gains by a newly formed left-wing alliance and record wins by the far right. Announced early this morning, the result threw French politics into turmoil, raising the prospect of a paralyzed legislature unless Macron is able to negotiate alliances with other parties. The centrist camp has been seeking from parliamentary rivals in order to salvage some of his reform agenda and avoid political paralysis. While Mr. Macron's ensemble grouping secured the largest number of lawmakers in the 577-seat National Assembly, it fell well short of an absolute majority in a vote on Sunday that saw a left-wing alliance and the far-right perform very strongly. There is no script in France for how things should unfold. Hold on.
Comment en discuter. Voilà. Et très bien. Il faudra des alliances.
Now, newly elected and re-elected members of the French Parliament arrived today at the National Assembly in Paris, with centrists vowing to listen to the French people and opposition lawmakers deeming President Emmanuel Macron a fallen star after failing to keep his absolute majority. While Macron's ensemble grouping secured the largest number of lawmakers, as we mentioned earlier, in the 577-seat National Assembly, It did fall short of an absolute majority on Sunday, which saw a left-wing alliance and the far-right perform very strongly. And that vote was a painful setback for Macron, who was re-elected in April. In his second and final term, he wants to deepen European Union integration, raise the retirement age and inject new life into France's nuclear industry. Arriving at Parliament on Monday today, Interim Minister Gérald Darmanin, who won re-election as MP of the North Department, said what's important is to be able to listen to the people who have expressed themselves in a democracy. Final figures showed Macron's centrist camp got 245 seats, well below the 289 needed to control Parliament. The new left-wing alliance got 131, the far-right 89, and Les Républicains got 61. Well, around 70,000 Belgians are protesting today through the streets of the capital, Brussels, demanding government action that tackles sharply rising living costs as one-day strikes at Brussels airports and on local transport networks nationwide are bringing public travel to a near halt. Protesters carried flags and banners, as you see there, reading more respect, higher wages, and end excess duty, while some set off flares. Some demanded the government do more, while others said employers needed to improve pay and working conditions. Unions say about 80,000 people were present today at the protest, but police put the figure at 70,000. Brussels Airport said it could not allow passenger flights to depart because the industrial action extended to security personnel, and most arrivals were also cancelled. Local public transport operators were running skeleton services, though some train lines were operating partly to allow protesters to converge in the capital. Belgian inflation hit 9% in June, mirroring sharp rises elsewhere, driven primarily by the impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on supply chains, energy and commodity prices. Prime Minister Alexander De Croo said Belgian workers were better protected than their counterparts in most other European Union countries because wages were indexed to inflation. History is being made in Colombia after the country voted leftist Gustavo Petro, a former member of the M19 guerrilla movement, who has vowed profound social and economic change, won Colombia's presidency on Sunday. Well, that's not the real news, of course, because the real news is Francia Marquez, a single mother and former housekeeper, became the country's first Afro-Colombian woman vice president. Now, that's history in the making. There she is. Petro beat construction magnate Rodolfo Hernandez with an unexpectedly wide margin of more than 700,000 votes in what analysts say was a demonstration of Colombians' eagerness for efforts to combat deep inequality. Petro is a former mayor of the capital, Bogota, and the current senator. He's pledged to fight inequality with free university education, pension reforms, and high taxes and unproductive land. He won 50.5% to Hernandez's 47.3% of votes. Petro proposes a ban on new oil projects. Those proposals start with some investors, though he's promised to respect current contractors. He says change is about leaving behind sectarianism, as he spoke to supporters on winning the election on Sunday.
¿Por qué no dejar de emitir más allá? ¿Y por qué no ayudar?
Let's turn to the UK now, as daily travellers might experience hell getting to work anytime from tomorrow. In the UK's rail system would find it really challenging getting around, at least for the next few days. And it's no thanks to the biggest rail strike in 30 years. It's set to begin at midnight. Strikes are planned on most major lines Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday. The RMT union says its members are proposing stagnating pay and proposing job losses, and they want justice. Disruption is expected on non-strike days because fewer staff will be working, and Network Rail has surged passengers to only travel by train if necessary. That strike will also take place across the London Underground on Tuesday, with Transport for London advising passengers to walk or cycle instead. A special train timetable for 20 to 20th to 26th of June was published on Friday. The Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers Union says it will intensify its strike campaign if members do not get an agreeable deal. It's not been any easier for those in the airports. 30 flights carrying up to 5,000 passengers being cancelled at Heathrow Airport due to technical issues affecting baggage. The airport asked airlines to cut 10% of flights from schedules across terminals 2 and 3 today. It comes after problems at baggage reclaim areas with images of luggage being piled up high emerging last week. Elsewhere, EasyJet announced plans to cut 7% of its 160,000 flights scheduled between July and September. A move came after Gatwick, EasyJet's main airport, said it will reduce the number of flights taken off from its airport due to the peak summer season because of staff shortages. Tens of thousands of passengers have been hit by airport disruptions and flight cancellations in recent weeks. Heathrow says cutting the number of flights would minimize the impact of the technical issues affecting baggage systems. Our London correspondent, Juliana Olaika, who just hustled through traffic right now, joins us on the programme. Juliana, how was the trip getting back home?
It was pretty tough. I've had a pretty brutal commute, which is why I'm looking like this. I just about managed to get into the house because, unfortunately, for our viewers in the UK, if you are trying to leave the office and trying to get home before any of these strikes take place, you're probably going to get caught up in some poor signalling. That's what happened to me. But of course, it's not today that's the biggest problem, Amarachi. It's going to be the rest of the week because, as you quite rightly said, Britons are bracing themselves for the biggest industrial action in 30 years, or some would say modern history, because there is a long-running dispute between union bosses and the British government. Now, there were last-minute talks which took place, I believe, at about 2 p.m., but alas, the boss of the RMT union did come out of those meetings saying that, unfortunately, the discussion hasn't progressed and these strike actions will take place. Now, officially, they're taking place on Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday this week. But because of just how disruptive these 24-hour strikes will be, we've basically been told to embrace for a strike action throughout the week. So this starts at midnight tonight. It will end on Sunday at midnight. Unfortunately, for many of us that live in London, this is a coordinated strike because it's not just the rail that will be down. Transport for London and TfL are also striking tomorrow. So it is going to be really tough getting into work. I kind of feel like some would say, you know, that's an issue for the UK. It's not an issue for us. But of course, it is going to be pretty severe. We rely heavily on the underground and the rail network. That's what makes London a massive metropolitan city. We enjoy the fact that you can jump on the Central line or the Jubilee line. There's the new Elizabeth line. We're just not going to have that option tomorrow. I managed to get into an Uber so I could join you for this discussion, Amarachi. And even trying to get that Uber, you know, there are about 7 or 8 cancellations. I tried to wing my way into an Uber with another passenger. I didn't manage to do that. But a lot of Uber drivers are not happy as well because, of course, you know, the cost of fuel is very, very high at the moment. They don't want to be stuck in traffic for hours upon hours trying to get somebody from the east of London to central London. So it is going to be a pretty down day. Not great for Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who's having so many domestic woes at the moment. But the fact that there's travel chaos, not just in the airports, but also on the roads, also on the rails, it's not great at all.
I can understand that, and I appreciate, you know, your resilience, trying to get from point A to point B. Juliana, I know it will be tough getting to work tomorrow, but I know you will muscle through it. But let's talk about, you know, the government encouraging people to stay home, you know, on some of these days. Will that also affect income for the month of June?
Absolutely, it will, and this is a huge problem. I think most London employers have adopted this kind of hybrid working approach. So if you are fortunate enough to be working at a company that does allow you to work from home, then that's great, right? We saw and we discussed it last week about, people flocking to the beach, working from home on laptops with the sun in their faces. But that's only one side of the story. There are people that can't work from home. There are people who are nurses, there are teachers, there are security staff workers, there are cleaners, there are people that actually need to get into the office. If you decide not to go in tomorrow, you could be putting your job at stake. We've also been speaking about the economy and how it's taken a huge battering because of inflation, which is currently running at a 40-year high in this country. We are expecting inflation figures for the month of April on Wednesday, currently at 9%. It could have already reached those double figures. So we could be talking about 11%. So if you're somebody that's already grappling, and we know that there are about 8 million households grappling with the cost of living crisis at the moment, the prospect of telling your boss you're not coming into work is going to be a massive issue for them. And then another issue that we've been speaking extensively about on the business shows, Amarachi, is the cost of fuel, which I also just mentioned. Week on, we are seeing record highs at the pumping stations, not just for petrol, but also for diesel. And diesel is what is keeping the HGV vans going in this country. Tomorrow, they are likely going to be suffering in hours-long traffic. So it's a huge issue in this country at the moment. And the fact that so many people are, agreeing with the union bosses, I think that the Whitehall and the Transport Ministry are trying to get the public to go against the unions by saying, look, this is how much union bosses are making. They're doing this to make your lives worse. And actually, I think people are like, no, they're not doing this to make our lives worse. They're unions. That's what unions do. They're striking because they're not happy about pay. And if somebody is going to stand up for the British public, then so be it. So even though, of course, we are going to be massively inconvenienced, I think the government trying to pit the unions against the ordinary worker hasn't really played in their favour.
Yeah, and they also have to look at their interests as well, don't they? Let's talk about the issue at Heathrow Airport and, all this chaos caused by what? A rise in the number of people trying to spend summer outside of the UK. Who's taking the blame for all of this?
This is another major issue. And, this morning, the travel chaos just got deeper with that kind of surprise announcement from Heathrow, urging airlines to cancel a minimum of 10% of their flights. It's something that would be unprecedented and unheard of pre-pandemic, but we believe that this stems from an issue when it comes to baggage handling at Heathrow Airport on Friday. This was in Terminals 2 and Terminals 3. Lots of customers said that they were having to wait. Passengers were saying they were having to wait up to 3 hours to collect their luggage. Some were never able to retrieve them. So they're in their hotel, in their holiday destination, without having any bags. Now, to stop this kind of backlog, Heathrow did issue this announcement. We don't know what caused it. Was this caused because there wasn't enough staff being able to handle this baggage? Was it a technical failure? We're just not sure at the moment. But if you take a step back and you look at the wider picture of what's happening at Britain's airports at the moment, it does paint a very bleak picture. And we're just wanting to know now, why is there a shift of blame between the government, between the aviation sector? How is it possible that the aviation sector were able to advertise tens of thousands of flights for passengers when they knew they just did not have the staff to handle these flights? People going to the airport, getting on planes, many people getting on planes with children as young as 2, 3 and 4, being hauled off the plane at the last minute because they didn't have the cabin crew to take the flight to the destination. It's an absolute shambles, and something that I think Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, is going to have to answer for. I think it's been very easy for him at the moment to shift the blame to the aviation sector. But now there are calls for his resignation, particularly as, of course, we are going into this industrialized action this week. On top of that, people are not being able to go on their dream holidays. It's really not good. And people have been talking about the summer of discontent, comparing it to the late 70s when there was the winter of discontent. Several union bosses were asking people to stand up and strike. It does feel like we are getting this way, and we'll just have to wait and see how it pans out during the week. But it's not looking good. And there are a lot of angry people on the streets of London at the moment.
Well, be careful now. There are lots of people, I think, might also be trying to escape the heat in London, go somewhere cooler for the holidays. Juliana, once again, thank you for joining us. Appreciate all the hassle you had to go through to get home, and we hope that you have a better day tomorrow.
It was worth it. Thank you, Amarachi. We'll talk soon.
And when the world today returns, it's launch day for the largest rail passenger hub in Asia. It's in Beijing, China. Stay with us. Welcome back to the world today. Unfortunately, those mass shootings still on in the United States. One teenager died. 3 people were injured, including a police officer, after shooting at a music festival in Washington, D.C. Incident occurred in the evening at the intersection of 14th and U Street, an area crowded with bars and restaurants. It was not immediately clear if the suspect was in custody. Police said the shooting took place during an unpermitted music festival called Mochella. Shortly before the shooting, a firearm had been recovered from an individual in the area. Another firearm was found in the possession of one of the injured victims.
So right now we had 3 civilian persons that were shot, 2 adults, 1 juvenile, and then 1 police officer who was shot. The police officer is recovering from an area hospital. 2 of the victims are also recovering at an area hospital. 1 victim at this point, a juvenile victim, it appears that juvenile is deceased at this point. Unfortunately, we recovered several firearms in this area, to include a firearm off of one of the persons who was shot in this incident. I mean, I think, there's a theme that you see here. Illegal firearms in the hands of people who should not have them make events like this unsafe for people who just want to enjoy the beautiful weather, who want to enjoy Father's Day, and want to enjoy our city. This is unacceptable, and I think, as we continue to go through this investigation and we peel back the layers to really see what happened, we need to, as a city, we need to make sure that individuals are held accountable for their actions.
A 5.9 magnitude earthquake jolted Hualien County in eastern Taiwan at 9:05 local time today, according to the China Earthquake Network Center. The epicenter was monitored at 23.66 degrees north latitude and 121.52 degrees east longitude, with a depth of 10 kilometers. The whole island of Taiwan felt the tremor. Another 2 quakes occurred just 40 seconds right after, including a 4.8 magnitude one, according to the island's meteorological agency. There have been no human casualties and property losses have been reported so far. Due to the earthquake, subway trains in Taipei have been operated at lower speed. Weather conditions are very worrying in parts of Asia, particularly in India, Bangladesh and in China. Floods have inundated villages and caused death and havoc.
Residents of a town in northeastern Bangladesh navigated through flooded streets as the country experiences what officials have called some of its worst monsoon floods in recent history. Monsoon rains in low-lying Bangladesh have triggered catastrophic flooding in Sylhet, leaving a quarter of its 15 million population stranded amid fast-rising waters and swollen rivers. Around 300,000 people have been moved to shelters in Sylhet, but more than 4 million people are stranded near their inundated homes, compounding the challenges for authorities to provide aid, including drinking water and medical supplies. The situation is rather similar in India, as heavy downpours continue to torment residents in the northeastern state of Assam, leading to flooding in many villages and marooning thousands. People in Bongaigon City were forced to evacuate with their belongings as floodwaters inundated their homes. One local resident who shifted to a government camp said basic supplies were lacking.
We've been at the camp since morning. There has been no arranged provision of food and water. You can ask these affected people. Many officials from the administration, including the ones who checked the water supply, came and now they are working to protect the dam.
A boat carrying 9 people also capsized in the Brahmaputra River. According to a local police official, 5 people were still unaccounted for, and a search operation involving 2 government agencies is underway. China was hit by a rare convergence of record rainfall, heat waves, and a tornado in the southern megacity of Guangzhou, displacing millions of people, damaging properties and swamping farmlands. The early summer storms have been greater in intensity and more prolonged than usual this year, with precipitation in Guangxi, Guangdong, and Fujian at its highest since 1961, according to local weather bureaus.
And as we had the program, the largest railway passenger hub in Asia was put into operation today in Beijing as a 4-year reconstruction breathes life into the Chinese capital's oldest railway station. With a gross floor space of nearly 400,000 square meters or 57 standard football pitches, Beijing Fangtai Railway Station has 32 rail tracks, 32 platforms, and is able to accommodate a maximum of 14,000 passengers per hour. Located in southern Beijing's Fangtai district, the time-honored station was built in 1895 and used to provide both passenger and freight services until its closure in 2010. Reconstruction of the station began in 2018. In addition to accommodation expansion, the station has adopted green and low-carbon concepts of planning and design, with the installation of more than 200 light pipes, which can save 950,000 kilohertz of electricity every year and reduce carbon emissions by more than 900 tons, and solar photovoltaic panels, which can generate 7 million kilohertz green electricity every year. Amazing. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.